Now, Braveheart is basically an affront to historical accuracy. Uh, Basically, nothing in this movie is historically accurate. It is atrocious. But the weird thing is, if we treat this as a pure fantasy movie, let's say it's traditional fantasy story of barbarians fighting the big evil civilized empire, then the Battle of Stirling is one of the best depictions of a medieval battle ever produced by Hollywood. It's weird, but let me explain. And we are, of course, talking about the Battle of Stirling Bridge in the movie. And let's just get the most obvious thing out of the way. In the movie, there is no bridge during the Battle of Stirling Bridge. They don't even show the river Forth and what have you. But ignoring all of that, this battle is still one of the best depictions of a medieval battle in a fantasy setting that Hollywood has ever produced, and it's amazing. So let's take a look. And I mean, it begins with the British using archers to soften up the enemy, and lo and behold, no fire arrows. There are no fire arrows in this battle. Of course, they're going to use fire later on in the movie. I mean, it's just so. But in this battle, no fire arrows, no fire at all. So they launch arrows at distance, and they soften up the enemy who hide beneath their shields, and people get shot. And if you take a look at the gathering of Scots, you can see one guy in the top right corner standing up. He doesn't care about the arrows. Extras, wonderful. But the use of arrows and archers in this battle, top notch if we think of it as a fantasy battle, right? So we're excellent start to this battle. And yes, then you have William Wallace with his big speech, and he tells his own nobles and the cavalry to, fall back and trick them to attack. And then what do we see? What happens next? Arrogance, of course, by the British commander, pure arrogance. But he orders a cavalry charge, and what do they use? Lances. They use lances. They charge with lances. They don't charge in like we see in every other movie, like Outlaw King and stuff like that, when they charge in with swords. They have lances. It's a cavalry charge with lances in this movie that is so famous for being an affront to historical accuracy. It's amazing. It is a cavalry charge with lances, knights with heavy lance charging straight in towards the enemy. Brilliant stuff. And they are repelled. Infantry defeats cavalry with pikes. Now, this is not the proper representation of the Scottish Schiltron. Never mind, it's a fantasy battle at this point, and they use pikes uh, that they have made from these long pieces of wood from the woods and the forests. I mean, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. This is how you want a barbarian horde in a fantasy setting to defeat modern civilized advanced heavy cavalry and knights, right? It's just brilliant. So you have a cavalry charge with lances, and the barbarians rely on pikes to defeat this devastating cavalry charge. It's just pure brilliance. And unfortunately, when both armies deploy the infantry, they rush at each other, when in fact they should be marching, keeping formation, keeping unit cohesion. So what you see here does not happen. So you have this massive brawl. You want to be in control of your forces and be able to issue orders to individual units. Never mind. Let's pretend that they actually march up towards each other, and then it would have been fine. But now you have this classic Braveheart style battle that has ever since influenced every medieval battle on screen. But despite this, the next thing that we will see is Again, awesomeness. And that is, of course, what William Wallace told us at the start of the battle, how he wanted to use his own cavalry. And they have swung around, outflanked the British, and are now attacking the archers and the British rear. And this is what William Wallace said: out, swing around behind them, take out their archers, and we'll meet in the middle. And that is what they did. And this is brilliant use of cavalry. This is how you should use cavalry. So they kind of show us just how to not use cavalry with the big assault up against prepared infantry. And then they show us, you know what? This is how you use these fast-moving troops. You swing around and attack the enemy in the flank and the rear when they least expect it. Brilliant stuff. I mean, just ignore that the two armies rush each other with the infantry and pretend that they march and face each other on the field of battle. I mean, this is one of Hollywood's best depictions of a fantasy style medieval battle. So here you have the two sides. You have the River Forth, no bridge for whatever reason. The two armies have moved up. Infantry is fighting. You have the British archers in the rear, and the Scottish cavalry has moved away and removed themselves from the battle. You have the big brawl, and what happens next? Well, the British are outnumbering the Scottish, and they are inflicting casualties and grinding the Scots down. But this is, of course, when the Scottish cavalry swings around on the flank and comes up behind the British and are poised to strike the archers and the British rear, as you know, the British are now engaged and locked in melee with the Scottish infantry. The British archers and support units are forced to flee. They get across the River Forth, I assume, somehow. There might be a bridge, you never know. They flee at least, and then you have the Scottish cavalry behind the British lines, and they begin to attack the British from the rear, pushing into the center of the battle, where they will meet up with their own infantry, having now pinned the British infantry in between the Scottish infantry and the Scottish cavalry. And at this point, the British have essentially lost, with Scottish cavalry cutting them down from behind. The Brits have lost the advantage of numerical superiority, and the Scots are pushing in from the front, they're pushing in from behind, and just decimating the British forces at this point. And the Scots have won this fantasy style version of the battle at Stirling Bridge using brilliant medieval tactics that we rarely see in Hollywood movies. So I just love it. So we begin with this big exchange in the middle between cavalry and pikes, and then the infantry are moving up and fighting against each other. And then and of course, we have the archers launching arrows at the Scots to begin with, and then the clashes in the middle. And then you see the Scottish cavalry coming in behind, striking the British rear, and then pushing in to the British infantry, and it all just collapses from there on out. So we're seeing good use of tactics from both sides. I think it's hubris and arrogance that the Brits send in the cavalry straight at the Scots. But I think that works. I'm sure there's been commanders that have done that historically, misused the knights and cavalry in that way. I think it works, right? And this is just a brilliant piece of medieval combat in a fantasy setting. Uh, I'm just curious where the river and the bridge is at during the Battle of Stirling Bridge in this movie, but never mind that. I just think this is a brilliant depiction of a fantasy battle in a Hollywood movie.